Good morning, Yuri. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, good to have you. So I'd like to start with just kind of going over a bio, right? Yuri Kurat is the founder and CEO of Akko Navigation. Originally from Ukraine, he moved to the United States in 2014 after building a software business. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Yuri began collaborating with engineers and frontline operators to address one of the modern warfare's most difficult challenges: operating drones in environments where GPS is denied or degraded by electronic warfare. That effort led to the creation of Akko Navigation, which develops GPS free navigation systems for autonomous drones. Well, again, pleasure to have you. Yuri, before we talk about drones and technology, who are you? What shaped the person sitting here today in front of me?
I was born in Ukraine to a Baptist pastor's family. We were, going to church every Sunday, and I was involved in youth ministry at some point. So I was always kind of around people, and my position kind of pushed me towards being a leader in my friend group, and then it kind of grew, and that helped me to start my first business, and then in 2012 I started my software business in Ukraine. And then every business book that I read said you have to be where your customers are, and here in the Pacific Northwest I had one customer, a coffee roaster company who was starting an online retail up on Camino Island. And so I said, all right, my wife and I would choosing between the Bay Area and here, and Seattle looked like a lot of growth was happening here in the area. So we decided to go with Seattle, especially that we had some people that we knew here. It turned out to be a great choice. We did work with some great companies around here. And then when the war in Ukraine started, I think every Ukrainian man has a little bit of guilt that my people are struggling there. What are you doing for it? So I was kind of looking for ways to do it, and my buddy was building drones for frontlines, and I said, are there any projects that you guys need help with? And that was one of them. He said, we have this skunk works that we're working on visual navigation. Let's see what we can do there, and that's how it started. But as far as me personally, I try to go where the spirit leads, so to say, to see where the opportunities are, where can be most helpful and to the people, and bring the most good.
It sounds like you're very passionate about the cause. And so, are you still operating your software company?
No, luckily, my wife has been my head of delivery the last few years of the business, so I was able to pass it off to her. She's the boss now, and since early 2025, I'm actually all in on navigation.
Okay. And what would you say is the main? It's like, so what sets Akko? And I guess tell us a little bit about Akko and how is it different than the other drone companies out there, and where it sits in relation to kind of what's going on in the world aside from Ukraine and
Okay. Yeah. Well, Aqua Navigation, we're not a drone company. We're a navigation company. So we work across all the platforms that exist there. So we specifically made the module that will hook up to any commercially available drone. And because of the hobby drone and racing drone culture, there have been a number of standards that developed that allowed us to come up with a single interface that we can work with, and then which allows us to convert any drone into an autonomous machine. So what we make, I actually have on my desk this working version. So this is a Chimera drone made in the States, and we make just this little part which implements visual inertial navigation. The problem we're solving is electronic warfare. So right now the problem is quite extensive because about 50% of all drones sent to either a kinetic mission or a monitoring mission, they will fail because of electronic warfare. So the adversary has to only figure out which frequencies does the drone communication operate at, then jam that frequency, and then they can be successful in downing those missions. So we thought, what can we do in order to make a box or make a navigation that does not depend on external signals, does not emit any signals, so kind of flies under the radar and uses other method of navigation. So that's how we came up with the idea of visual. So I think the space for drones is already in the United States is quite filled. There's some great players here who export their stuff to Ukraine and other conflict zones as well. So we decided that we will be the navigation layer. That's a problem big enough that no drone company wants to take on themselves, and so we don't look at others as at drone companies as our competitors, but rather as potential customers.
Okay. So why do you say that most companies don't want to operate in that infrastructure layer?
Because it's difficult enough that it warrants its own research field. So our partners who we're integrating with, we're talking to them, and they want to focus on what's essential to the drone. You know, how far can it go? How long can it stay in the air? How much payload can it deliver, and all that stuff. So those basic parameters of the drone is what everybody's competing out right now, and it especially that we're receiving signals from the Department of War, especially with the drone dominance program. We're seeing the signals that they want, right? They want to be integrated easily into the control and command that they have, that the officers don't need any special training to use any platform. They have to be modular and what's the word? Cooperate with each other, interoperable. While this piece is big enough, because it's not only navigation. Navigation is the solution or the antidote to a problem of a larger problem of electronic warfare. Electronic warfare is this whole field of action versus counteraction, where you have radio frequencies against another. In most cases, it's a cat and mouse game, right? So the spectrum for operation for drones starts with about 150 megahertz and goes up to like 25 gigahertz, because the drone needs to have position, video monitoring, and control link. So and then depending on where the adversary thinks you're operating, they will try to jam or spoof a certain frequency and either down or divert the drone. So navigation, what we're doing is only one solution to a larger problem. Of course, there's adjacent areas. For example, there needs to be object recognition. If we don't depend on any external signals, if we can't use GPS, for example, or if we cannot rely on external transceiver, how do we complete the mission? How do we see the target? How do we recognize it? How do we read the friend or foe mechanism and then end it there? So electronic warfare is its own problem. So that's why we're positioning ourselves quite comfortably, not vertically integrated. For example, Anduril is vertically integrated, but we're horizontally integrated across all of these platforms to help them solve the problem of electronic warfare.
Interesting. How do you think just the use of drones came about? Like in since you've dove into this business, like how did it become a thing for just the layman, for the folks that are just sitting in the office reading the news, right?
It's not obvious, right? It's
Right.
it's kind of weird if you think about it. I remember at the beginning of the war, I was already living in the States, and I saw my friends and my friend Ivan, who I ended up partnering with. At the beginning, they were just standing at the edges of the city making Molotov cocktails, right? Because nobody knew what was going to happen. Back in 2022, it was still very much a traditional war. Russians had tanks and helicopters and aviation to kind of for cover, and Ukrainian army was quite weak. You know, we didn't ourselves think it would be advantageous to us to proceed in a traditional way. So the first half a year, so since February to about the fall, September, October, everybody was kind of feeling their way, trying to get their sea legs. So, for example, the star weapons of that period was the shoulder mounted weapons that we got back from previous Trump administration, the javelins, and they were they're trying to shoot and hit the tanks. And then the first drones that used in Ukrainian war at the beginning was the Turkish drone called Bayraktar. And so those were more akin to American Reapers. They high altitude bombers and remote controlled. But then Russians learned to avoid those, to hide from them, do camouflages and whatnot. And then because there was a small community of hobbyists in Ukraine, it just started to proliferate. They said, well, what if we take a little DJI, strap a grenade onto it, and go try to hit something? And first experiments were successful, and then once everybody kind of understood this is the way to go. Then the question was, how do we produce this en masse, right? DJIs are expensive. So what do we do from there? And they started to make these really stripped down drones from Chinese parts. You would go like in Ukraine, the biggest marketplace, like it's Amazon here. They would go to like AliExpress or Alibaba.com and you could buy anything there. So they started building these really cheap, maybe $600, $700, $800 drones on a carbon fiber frame. And drone itself is not that difficult to build. Yeah, you need a little chip for the controller, propellers, frame, antennae, and whatnot. So that's how a lot of these started. And to this day, the drone production in Ukraine is very much distributed. It's people making them in their garages, kitchens, and supplying to the front lines.
Yeah, it's almost like I read a book last year on how the American government mobilized their industrial base back in World War II. It almost seems similar to what you guys are going through, right? It's everybody chipping in, um, to protect what you guys are fighting for.
Yeah. Is there any chance that book was Freedom's Forge?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'm reading it right now too.
Are you reading it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good book. So, who would you say needs this most today? Commercial, business? I mean, is this something where you take it from what's going on right now to in the front line to potentially a commercial use?
The first use case is, of course, frontline, because that's where the need is. And I think the advantage that the Ukrainians have and companies that are kind of originated there is not my phrase, but I love it. It's the luxury of necessity, right? It's if we don't do this, what do we do? Right now, I think the statistic is about 85% of all Russian losses are due to Ukrainian drones specifically. So yeah, this is the first. It's nimble, it's cheap. The word for it in the DOW circles is attritable. Attritable just means that it's cheap enough that you can deploy them en masse and counteract pretty much anything that comes at you. So yeah, the first one will be used in active battlefield zones. And of course, we're just talking about it generally because your drones are the most simple case is that you strap some incendiary device to it, you send it over, ram something, it explodes. But there's a lot of stuff going on with, how do you navigate them? What kind of payload can it lift? How does it deliver? Can it, how does last mile look? Last mile is huge right now because can you do a pixel locking to recognize what the target is and then go into it? But then if there's a duel going on, how do you know which tank is yours or which troops are yours and not? So there's a lot of things going on, and they will evolve into a much more diverse system of technologies, which then will start to seep into commercial use, which is exactly what happened after World War I, World War II, with such technologies. So with what we're seeing a large request or need for commercial use, for example, in first responders missions. So I've spoken to the fire chief in Tillamook County, and he's huge into drones. He's using them for natural disaster situation when there's everything's, for example, forest fires, to deliver either provisions or to communicate with people trapped in certain zones. He's already using a lot of it, and it sees a potential for the future. Last mile delivery in urban areas is big as well because the buildings, the concrete walls, they degrade the GPS signal. So usually, what you need to do is use cell towers and kind of additional methods to navigate. So something like visual navigation can help there. As far as drones, agriculture is huge. I have a friend out south here, and he has several fields, and he's asking me, "Can you help us make a bigger drone that will help me distribute?" He does some spraying before and after harvest, and he says right now it costs so much to send out tractors and people and get the chemicals, keep them agitated, and so it's effective. So he says, "Can you build me something that will kind of go around because it seems like something that could be highly automatable?" So I do think that out of the war in Ukraine, out of the other conflicts that we're seeing around with use of drones, there's going to be a huge advantage to commercial space.
Why do you think? That's very. I mean, it makes sense, right? Instead of flying a crop duster over a field, why not just push a button or schedule it such that the drone just lifts from its pad and then starts dusting the crops? It's
Yeah.
surprising that they haven't used that more frequently today. right?
We're at the very beginning of this thing, right? We're at the beginning of understanding what the potential is and how it can be done. Even for crop dusting, it's not as simple, right? Because you have to haul around a pretty large cistern of chemicals in water in order to do that. So you have to solve that
Or you could
problem.
get like a hose or something.
Something like that. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to be mindful of the battery, and how, the heavier it is, the more it drains. But maybe there's something kind of going along with it, and the cistern on wheels. But then, yeah. So there's a number of ways to serve it. But you're right. I mean, the imagination can run wild here. I think we're up for quite a leap in automation.
Now, going back to just kind of what's going on geopolitically, why do you think the U.S. is making drone dominance a priority? Like based on your view and what you can share, what are you seeing on a very high level, and why?
It is. I think the U.S. is correct to learn from what they see around the world. At the beginning of the war, there was some skepticism about, well, Ukraine is probably a regional conflict, and it doesn't really have to do with what we do, with what U.S. does, and what kind of engagements we're looking for in the future. I think U.S. also realizes that its future adversaries will be technologically advanced. So even with the war in Iran, they already started experiencing what drone warfare looks like, because as far as I can see, the U.S. forces were not prepared for the mass barrages of these things, and how to repel them. And that's why, in very short order, they called several operators from Ukraine to help protect against the Shaheds, because obviously Ukraine has a lot of experience specifically with Shaheds, as Iran was shipping them over to Russia since pretty much the beginning of the war. That's number one. And looking at geopolitical situation, it kind of reminds me of the years leading up to World War One, when everything's kind of in balance. It can go either one way or another, and people are being cautious about how they prepare. So, United States is engaged in Iran right now, kind of looking at what might happen in South China Sea. And if that does happen, the axis will kind of follow, because, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, they're very clearly our adversaries or political opponents, geopolitical opponents of the United States. And they have historically acted together. So if something happens in the China Sea, for example, first of all, China has DJI, right? So it's already millions of drones that they can use. What can the United States counteract with? And I think the move that the Secretary of War is making is the correct one. But I also think that it's very, very slow. I understand. 2 years ago, I remember there was a think tank, I think Atlantic Council. They made this whole paper of recommendations on the changes in procurement within DoD, and a lot has been done, but still not enough. For example, right now the commitment of the DIU and the U.S. Army is to buy about 1 million drones in the next 2 years. Just for comparison, Ukraine is using 4 million drones every year right now, just to keep the
Or
Russians out. 4 million a year. Yeah. So U.S. is still behind.
the parts are all scattered on
Most of them are one-way drones. Yeah.
one way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's three types of missions that the U.S. is currently looking to use drones for. One is called ISR, which is reconnaissance and monitoring. Another one is kinetic, and kinetic means either you release basically a bomber action or suicide. And third one is called BDA, which is the impact confirmation. So you can hover over and either correct artillery or confirm that the target has been impacted.
Yeah, most entrepreneurs with your skill set think about other things to do with. I mean, what as you got into this business, was there anything that just stood out and that actually pulled you in more so that you're fully committed, or because it doesn't sound like you're backing down?
Yeah, I mean, again, luxury of necessity. I am, I love Ukraine. I love people in there. I know a ton of people. I know people who have been drafted in the military. One of my friends lost an eye and an arm,
Mhm.
because he was a machine gunner. And my primary motivation to get into this business was to just repel the Russians, push them out, and this seemed like this would give our troops a significant tactical advantage on the front lines. And then, of course, when you think about it, all right, the cat is out of the bag now. So we know this technology exists. We know anybody could use it. I mean, terrorists could use it, right? And especially if they can get around the dependency on external signals and our dependency to to counteract their action, then we're in real trouble. So my thinking was, if we don't get ahead of the autonomy progress, we might be the victims of somebody else doing it. So this is the urgency I have with me every day: is how do we advance, a few steps further than the bad guys, and the more of the experience we can take out of Ukraine and place in the hands of our allies, the better off we're going to be, as far as free world goes.
No, that's powerful. So in your conversations, as you're out here in the market, do you find that people are just disconnected from what's going on?
There's still a big factor of distance, because the war is happening somewhere there. It's sort of on the TV, and yeah, it looks horrible, but it's a little more real than what you see it in a movie, right? It's still bad, but still you don't feel it. So when I talk to people, a lot of them are for Ukraine. I think the online world is quite a bit different from real world, right? Because online
Mhm.
you get
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of Russian trolls. There is actually bot farms in Russia that would amplify, Ukraine is a corrupt country, who cares about it? Just, let it die. But in real world, a lot of people care. And especially since 2022, that there has been a growing sense of alarm that this is not a regional conflict. This is actually going to be close to us daily. When it comes to business community, just trying to have those conversations. The companies that are in the defense sector, they are fully aware of what's going on. They're trying to put pedal to the metal, increase their production, and go within the commercial sector. Investments. As far as that goes, there's still the idea that it's just another business. And what has become clear to me is that when you're talking about defense, the metrics for growth are quite a bit different from other commercial businesses. There's urgency to it that needs to be taken into account. There is the counteraction that, or some real threats, real adversaries that work against you every day, right? So you have to kind of keep a few steps ahead all the time.
So what do you see on the horizon for the remainder of the year in terms of just kind of where things are going from your purview?
You mean geopolitically, or with
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
business?
Geo-
Geopolitically. Yeah, well, the big change we're seeing this year is, at the beginning of the year, we finally have reached parity of the impact that the Russian troops can have on the war in Ukraine. So, meaning that the replaceability of troops has come to net zero, which means that we Ukrainians are able to neutralize as many troops as Russians are able to deliver to the front lines, and now the balance is changing the other way, and we see evidence of this by Ukraine kind of taking territory back. So actually, it still kind of wobbles here and there, but the tide had turned. So that's why we see Russia just targeting specifically civilian infrastructure. We see kind of peaceful civilians die, and it's because there's nothing they can do on the front lines anymore. And the kill zone does help. The kill zone was already there for about 18 months. So I think with Ukraine turning up pressure on Russia, that's going to move the needle as well. So, for example, today is the beginning of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, and Ukraine had attacked the refineries in and around St. Petersburg to turn up the pressure. And I'm monitoring the situation every day, of course, and I'm kind of looking at Russian media a little bit, and their TikToks and the social media. The big change for Russia is that they thought that Russia was so big, so powerful, that they watched the war on their TVs like everybody else. And now that in big cities, in Moscow and St. Petersburg and city, or industrial cities like Tuapse and large ports, they're seeing, this is real now. This is not somewhere on the screen. So that's gonna change their minds and their attitudes quite a bit. To finish the war, it's not only enough to win on the battlefield, right? Because if we run the thought experiment, all right, let's say Ukraine gets some technological advantage, we're able to push Russians out with smaller numbers than they have. Obviously, they're a much bigger country. They're like 15 times what Ukrainian population is. But then it doesn't mean that the war is over, right? It doesn't mean that Russians will stop attacking. So it needs to be a combination of action on the field, which will later dictate the diplomatic agreements, right? So
Mhm.
what Ukrainian army does is it gives enough basis for the diplomats to go and see and tell Russians, you see, you're not going anywhere, right? So how about we just stop where we are and then solve the rest of the political and territorial issues by agreement, right? So that's the combination that from Ukrainian side we see is the most viable one for stopping the war, but it starts on the battlefield and goes into diplomatic sphere. As far as what I see before the end of the year, I see that the even when the war in Ukraine stops, the problem doesn't stop. Drones, everybody's building drones now, everybody's building systems around to make them go farther, lift more payload, do more damage, and the counteraction. So, for example, in the Pacific Northwest right now, the bigger topic is counter UAS. People are getting ready for FIFA. Everybody's kind of, well, what happens if somebody tries to attack? So it's gonna be on both sides. It's gonna be the drone damage action and the CEOS as well.
Yeah, you got a lot of games coming here. Yeah, speaking of what stops the war, what would you say started the war from your?
Russian imperialism. If
It's about territory, right?
Oh no! I mean, have you seen Russia? It's huge.
Yeah,
There's large swaths where nobody lives. Right? They have a lot of territory. This is really about ambition. So the problem for Russia is that Russia sees itself as this huge empire with deep history, sort of like Roman Empire. In fact, one of their ideologues, Dugin, he calls Moscow the third Rome, right? And the third Rome because they see themselves as successors of Roman Empire. So Rome, Constantinople, and now Moscow is this third Rome, the protector of the Eastern Orthodox faith. So they see themselves, they call themselves Russians, but where the name comes from is from Kiev Rus, right? It's the lands around Kiev that was called Rus, and they kind of appropriated that name. So without Ukraine, they don't really have a history, or they don't have a claim to be a great nation, empire, and things like that. So when you hear some, far right pundits, for example, they would invite Dugin or other people, pro Russian propagandists. They would say we need to go away from U.S. dominated world to multipolar world, and multipolar basically means that this modification of Monroe Doctrine, where U.S. has influence over the Western Hemisphere, and then Russia has influence over kind of Ukraine and Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and then China has the Asian. So that's what they mean. They're still playing games as if we were in 19th century, right, where everybody has their zone of influence and we're sort of contending on the world stage. So they're not thinking about democracy, they're not thinking about free world, or they're thinking about zones of influence. So when we talk about why Russia attacked, it's because of who they are, who they see themselves to be, which is an.
What do you see for the next 10 years with Akko?
I see that the navigation piece is something that is very obviously a problem. So it's a great way to enter the market with that solution. But then there's a ton of other problems that we could solve that are adjacent to navigation problems. So I already mentioned the last mile delivery problem, the 3D object recognition, the friend of foe protocols, all of those things. Anything that enables a carrier drone to fly autonomously, to be independent of any radio frequencies, will increase the effectiveness of the missions that they carry out. So I see there's a lot of adjacent fields that we will go into. So right now we're integrating with several partners and then kind of letting them go in the field and see how everything performs, collecting data from the field, using that to iterate, and then going into adjacent areas. We will let the drone makers do what they do best, which is the propulsion systems, the payloads, the airframes, and then they will trust us to make themselves autonomous and effective once they're out in the field.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the 4 million drones. How are they sourcing all that material, and where are they sourcing it from? And part of the drone dominance program is to source from the U.S. made item. So what's your
Yeah.
knowledge of how they're sourcing versus what you see as a challenge locally?
Ukraine is, in terms of drone warfare, is Wild West, right? So there's very little regulation, which means that we can turn out I mean, Ukraine can churn out these drones in large numbers at very high speeds, and the reason for that is because everybody has a 3D printer now. So even with my old business, one of our guys had signed up for a program in Ukraine where he gets these orders from different frontline units and like for specific parts, and then he prints them overnight, sends them out in the morning. So everybody has their own like little manufacturing, and at the beginning of the war we had to buy everything from China because we couldn't make anything. So, but now it's possible to actually to build a drone with only Ukrainian parts. So we know how to make cameras, we know how to make rotors, propellers, airframes, and even chips. Sorry, not chips. Flight controllers with not the physical ones, but we import and repurpose chips from Taiwan. So with time you will get more and more capability. The United States is more organized, more regulated in this space, and US doesn't have the luxury of necessity, right? We can still, I'm sort of on both. I'm actually a US citizen and I'm a Ukrainian citizen, so I'm both. So in the US there's quite a bit of regulatory oversight, and also which serves as an obstacle because right now we have NDAA protocol, which is the National Defense Act, which says that which actually changes too, because at the beginning there was only four covered countries from which you could not import parts. So that was North Korea, Russia, Iran, and China. So, and then the regulations changed slightly to say anything produced outside of the United States is now covered. But now I see FAA is giving some carve outs to specific manufacturers. So it's also changing. It's in flux. Testing is another thing because it's not like you can test drones in a park, but as soon as you strap something incendiary onto it, then it becomes a whole thing. So access to the test ranges is pretty expensive and can take quite a bit of time. So there needs to be some relaxation of regulation in order to speed up production. Right? It's the trade-off that you make. How risky can you make your posture in order to increase production, right? And how fast do you want it? Because I think right now, if US went into an active engagement with China, our odds would not be the best. In fact, at the end of 25, there was a report leaked from the Pentagon. It was called Overmatch report, I think, and the summary of it was like out of the 20 war games that they ran, pretty much all of them US lost engagement because of attritability, because they could not counteract the many cheap loitering munitions that was lobbed in our direction. So I do think the DOW is moving in the right direction, but not quite fast enough.
Yeah. I know. As I think about your luxury of necessity, it's no different than the insurance world. Unless there's a risk, people don't go out looking for insurance. But once the risk is experienced, they go out looking for it. But by then it could be too late. Right. So it
That's
almost
exactly
seems like
right.
what you're saying is, you almost need to just ship a 3D printer to every citizen if they want to start getting ahead, or something to that effect, right? But there's just no need for it right now because there's no.
Right now, I think the problem is perception. Right now, and there's actually harmful voices in the U.S. politics, in the U.S. blogosphere, podcastistan, and that people are saying, well, don't mind them. It's just, Ukraine and Russia has had this conflict for centuries, and it's just between them. It's not between them. The ideological adversary of Russia is not Ukraine, it's the United States. They see Ukraine as sort of like a wayward child. The Ukraine was a part of Soviet Union. It was part of Russian Empire before that. It was they veered too much away from Russia, and they wanted to join the EU. They wanted to join NATO. So we need to do a special punishment operation on them. And but the real ideologues, what they're saying is that Ukraine is not its own agent. So if you listen to, for example, the Russian propagandists, they're saying that Ukrainians, they're not a match to us. We could have won within a week and taken all over their territory. But their handlers in the United States, their handlers in England did not let them do it. That they sent them weapons which allowed them to stand. So Ukraine is not even the enemy. So the enemy is the Western free world. So and that's the message that the United States needs to heed, because eventually this will come here. Right now we have the luxury of forewarning, and we need to use that time to prepare.
It's a lot of deep stuff here. So what keeps you up at night?
The fact that somebody's already figured this out, somebody's already using this, and will be too late to the game. So I'm monitoring what's going on, and there's the official channels, the news channels, but also in Ukraine, a lot of people are using social media app, Telegram, for example, and there's a lot of frontline units on it, and they're sharing what's actually going on. Whatever they down, and they take pictures of it and say, oh, here's what we see. Can you help us figure out what this is and what this is for? So for example, so the module that we built, something similar we've already seen from a downed Russian drone about a half a year ago, but obviously it was an experiment, but a failed experiment because we don't see them using this anymore. So something went wrong with them. So we have to monitor, like, what do they know? What can they possibly counteract to what we do? And sort of in your head, it's always a cat and mouse game of where we are, where do we think they are, and what can they do once we start launching. For example, these guys, Ukrainians, would put like a Starlink on top of a drone like this, maybe a sort of larger, like a 15-inch frame, and do reconnaissance missions with that, right? So that seems all right. That seems like a great all around system, right? Because this is a satellite internet, we're using visual for navigation, nothing can down it, right? But they can, and then sometimes we don't know how. So it's always, while it's an active engagement, it's always cat and mouse. It's always kind of trying to stay ahead of the other guy a few steps.
So I guess one of the other questions I want to ask. So drones raise questions around privacy, safety, potential misuse, and you kind of alluded to this potential misuse earlier when you mentioned terrorists getting a hold of this technology. How does ACO think about responsibility as the technology improves?
Well, it's putting technology in the right hands, right? So there's no way of us stopping any terrorist organization of acquiring this technology. Drones themselves, as we already mentioned, they're not that hard, right? It's a chip, camera, antennae, and motors. So how do you counteract that? And the only way is by using the next level of technology, using the next one, kind of seeing ahead of what might be used, and then counteracting that, and then seeing what can be put in opposition to you, and back and forth. So I think that terrorists and criminals are named that for a reason. They don't follow convention, they don't follow rules. So the only way we can do it is just to stay ahead. And I do think that free market and democracy is a much stronger mechanism, because it allows for personal freedom, for creative expression, which also means that if people take it responsibly and use their minds for the right purposes, we can stave off others. I mean, historically, in the last 200 years, the democratic free countries were the strongest one, and I think that's because we honor friends, honor freedom, and we can make, and we honor agreements. If we do make a pact, then we stay within that pact, and that's what makes us strong. So we think this is our responsibility to give enough technological advantage to our allies in order to leverage that against terrorism, either by threat of destruction or by actually engaging. So, for example, the reason that the atomic bomb was not used since World War II was because of the threat of mutually assured destruction. And I think it's going to stay that way. It doesn't mean that the technology has to be used. It just means that the potential of use of this technology will prevent violence. And that's what we see our purpose is. We are providing you with the technology as a government, and you guys leverage it to keep the peace.
That makes sense, and it's good that you're on the right side of the field, right? So it sounds like you've been out talking to a lot of people. Have you tested the technology? I mean, are you part of any of initiatives that are going on right now?
Yeah, we're out testing in Ukraine. We have been for the last year. So especially on reconnaissance missions, this stuff works. In the States, we did our debut in about 6 weeks ago at Pendleton. There's a US test range. We wanted to see whether all the sensors that we're using can be used in the US, especially with the magnetic field, because it's kind of different around the world. So we had to calibrate against what we're seeing in the United States as far as magnetic field. So that test went smoothly, and now we're going into probably 5 different directions because of the drone manufacturers who want to integrate, fly with us, and then the next steps is going to just the special exercises, seeing the use cases that the various branches of military want to use, and kind of building towards that in the future.
Sounds like a lot of exciting stuff going on in the world.
I'm not getting enough sleep, but I'm also
Yeah,
loving it because there's the real feel that this is a sorely needed problem, a solution to a problem, and I'm so happy to be used in a way where we can untie the hands of the U.S. military along with the Ukrainian.
yeah, and also, I mean, it makes you feel like you're part of a bigger solution, right? This is bigger than a lot of people think, right?
I think it will prove to be yes, because just seeing at what other alternative solutions are and all their drawbacks, there's definitely drawbacks to visual navigation as well. But when you look at alternatives, this seems to be the most promising. And when we get validation, from some of the biggest drone manufacturers in the States, some of the DIU people, it's heartening. It's like we have a broad consensus of where we need to build. So now, how do we build it specifically so that it can be used for specific missions in around the world today?
I definitely appreciate you coming on the show. Anything you want to share with the audience before we get off?
Well, I mean, geopolitically, it's important to look at what's going on. I know it's stressful. It stresses me out to look at it. But if you don't look, then you're in a weaker position. So I would say, listen to what different people say. I'm far from the thought that the truth is somewhere in the middle, because there's this thing. Well, let's listen to the Russians, listen to the Ukrainians, let's listen to the Americans, and we'll figure out what the truth is in the middle. And that's not the way to figure out the truth, because Russians will just do their thing. They will tell you that Ukraine is a Nazi state and whatnot. But find what your position is on the world. Do you see America as an isolationist and we don't care what's going on in the world, or do you see America's mission as it has been since the Bretton Woods system, since World War II, where America keeps the peace and in return gets the strongest currency in the world, which I would prefer, actually. I think it's a good system. So, and then read the news from that perspective, because it matters it matters the same what news you hear and from whom you hear, because facts by themselves are neutral, right? It can be interpreted in different ways. So whoever is delivering the message is as important as what the message is. So I would say find people you listen to on the military engagements and geopolitical and political, and then I'm trying to interpret it as the single picture of the world, because it helps to determine what's good, what's right, and against what's wrong and evil.
I think that's the challenge today, is because to what you said earlier about Russian trolls, right? It almost comes down to who has the resources to keep buying FaceTime and just shoving propaganda down people's throat.
Yeah.
So how do you find your source of information online? You brought up TikTok. You know, like where you find, and how do people decipher what's real and what's not in the age of AI?
Several things I would say is one is it's important to understand that the online world and real world is different. Online world is all anonymized, and the most deranged news you would get from pages like America's Freedom or Fight for the Flag or something like that. These are like anonymized channels who spread all kinds of garbage, and like where the hell did this come from? So I usually listen to the people with whom I have similar worldview and similar values, because, for example, words like attack, oppression, fight for freedom, those are emotionally charged, meaning that what we mean by fight for freedom can mean very different things for Ukrainians and for example for Hamas, right? So you have to make sure that the people who you follow, you test them for values first. So that would be number one. Number two is it's easy to get caught up in an ideology, right? So you're right or left, you're more authoritarian or libertarian, and I try to stay out of those bubbles, because they will give you such distortions of the reality that you will start to support very weird things. For example, a couple of days ago, I saw a survey somewhere on the streets of either like Florida or something, where people would say who would you prefer, Hillary Clinton or Putin, or like Donald Trump or Putin? And half of the people who are identifying themselves as conservative, they would say, well, Putin, because first of all, he prohibits, LGBT propaganda. He puts he's a strong leader in the world and stuff like that. And I'm like, what are you, stupid? This guy's a dictator, and I get your conservatives. I get your values, but you've allowed yourselves to be put in such a bubble that you would take anybody who would take your position on a certain question and have that dictate your view, and have you supporting dictators. So in that sense, we have to be vigilant in who we listen to, that we take the information critically, and try to stay out of the ideological bubbles, because we become victims of propaganda.
People just not and just go about their life.
No, no, no. I mean, you have to get information from somewhere, right? So, I first find a source that I trust. So, and then these sources change. I used to, follow one pundit politically, and then a year later, I'm like, okay, this guy's going off in the other direction because he's getting influenced by somebody. So I find news sources, and I find people, because it's easy to see. It's not like, when you listen to somebody, it's not only information that you're listening to, it's also how they interpret it. And nobody can stand the temptation to interpret the information in a way that does not reflect their values. So you listen for the values. Like if you see that you're about 80-90% along with that person and how they interpret the world, then receive that information from them. I am a subscriber of several publications, like The Economist, Wall Street Journal, and things like that, and because those two, I think, are pretty correspondent to what I believe. So economists, they're obviously British, right? And so I don't really listen to them, what they say about U.S. politics, because what do they know, right? But other things I do listen to, what's going on in Europe, how do they interpret, the conflict Macron had with his prime minister. That's important. And one last thought I had about that economy. So these papers also are vulnerable to receiving false information. So, for example, information coming out of Russia, you shouldn't take it as information. You should take it as an op, right? So you have to look at it and try to distinguish what information they're putting out, which is close to reality, and what is an op. So, for example, up until 18 months ago, The Economist was reporting that Russia's economy is strong despite sanctions, despite oil prices, and being taken advantage of from India and China. But just that was because they were taking official numbers from Russian Economic Development Ministry. Why would you do that, right? So you actually have to look, and then all of a sudden, when they raised their rate to like 21%, economists changed its tune completely. So you kind of have to see which of the publications, what are their strong points, what are their weak points, and try to stay independent in your thought.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And thank you for sharing that, because there is a lot of information out there, and it's easy to go down the rabbit hole. And the thing with some of these algorithms, or pretty much most of them, it's going to keep feeding you the same thing. So once you start down the path, you just got to be mindful that all that's going to do is just continue to feed that interest.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's very easy to see. You see, a certain outlet starts glazing one leader or another, and like, all right, I'm done with you guys.
Yeah,
This is not objective information. When they yeah, but I won't. I criticize the conservatives the most, because that's I'm kind of closer to my view. So, but I'm like there. I mean, you have to be so vigilant to who you listen to, because it's so easy to slide off into just propagandizing on behalf of whatever Donald Trump does. That's not good.
thank you for that. How do you decompress? Like, you have all these things; these are big problems, and
Yeah,
I'm feeling stressed listening because I think about, okay, I gotta go prep, right? I gotta go get my doomsday bag ready just in case.
yeah. Well, I used to when I was younger. So I'm 42 now, but when I was younger, I definitely had the savior complex. I wanted to kind of be everywhere and help everybody, and that's really unhealthy. And I've seen my friends burn out because of this. So I try to see like where can I be useful, right? What can I actually do, and then do that thing. And as far as decompressing, kids help a lot. I have a daughter and a son, and it's quite a change of pace when you're like talking about deployment of your technology somewhere in the battlefield, and then 3 hours later my daughter asks, can we go ride bikes? And
Yeah.
that's
Can you hang on? I'm working on this thing.
yeah, but it's important to say yes, right? And because
Yeah.
then your mind relaxes and you're talking about silly things, and then the next day you're ready again. There's no way our brains can take all that information in and then stay within that stress and hold on to it and then be healthy the next day. So it's really important to find something that will take you away from for a night and then come back. And that, I think that's it's a good change of pace.
Yeah, and conversely, I'm sure that you and because you see your kids playing innocently, it drives you more to fulfill the mission you're working on. Because to what you said earlier, you would prefer the democratic system than the alternative. And people don't understand what the alternative looks like because I'm guessing your parents lived that alternative. So
That's
you
right.
saw firsthand, like, yeah, I don't like life that way. I came to America because it provided opportunity, and you prefer this way of life.
That's exactly right. I mean,
You want
one
to
of the
preserve
things
your kids' way of life as well.
I don't think Americans quite understand is that it's not for the territories occupied by Russians. It's not only a change of flag; it's a change of their life fundamentally. Because in Ukraine, all right, it's corrupt, right? So there's that element. There's a kind of post-Soviet drama going on, but fundamentally you're a free person. You can go anywhere, you can start a business, and on the territories where Russians come, it's literally hell, because they don't come to kind of free you and make you part their equals. They come to subjugate, right? So I mean, I'm gonna spare you the gory details of rape and everything, but even after that evens out, then you want to start a business, you better start paying your local policeman. You want to go somewhere, you better get authorization from authorities to do that. I mean, it's not only the question of territories, like, well, why do you want Crimea back? Why do you need Donbass back? Just for the sake of peace, just stop where you are. But you don't understand what's going on those territories. People are being sent to prison for protesting the war, or even there was one famous case in Russia, for example, where a woman came out with a little cardboard sign that had the words, literally two words on it. It says one word was two, another one was the words, stood on the red square, got thrown into jail, because everybody understands that two words means no to war, нет войне, right? And so any dissent, any dissenting opinion, anything that the government doesn't like, you get in trouble. From being interrogated, having pressure done on your family members, to you being put in jail and put in prison. I remember this because I was born in the Soviet Union, and because my dad was a pastor and Soviet Union was aggressively atheistic country, that KGB officers would come to our house and have one-on-one conversations with my dad. That's what we're talking about. This is not a change of territory. This is a change between the free world and whatever the hell Russia is.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand. Well, thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate you coming on the show. And
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It was fun.
yeah, yeah, and get the word out. Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.